Iran had a secret, Israel had a plan, and the Middle East was sitting on a powder keg that nobody in Washington wanted to talk about out loud. For over 4 decades, 2 of the most powerful nations in the Middle East have been locked in a shadow war. Assassinations in broad daylight, explosions inside nuclear facilities, cyber attacks that crippled entire industries, proxy armies stretched across 5 countries, and a web of intelligence operations so deep, so dark, that most of it will never be declassified in our lifetimes. But here's what's different now. The shadows are gone. The war that was never supposed to be visible is visible. Missiles are flying, drones are crossing borders, and the question that every defense analyst, every intelligence officer, every diplomat in Washington is asking right now is simple. Is this the beginning of something that cannot be stopped? This is not a story about religion. This is not a story about ancient grudges. This is a story about power, survival, nuclear ambition, and 2 governments that have been playing a deadly game of chess for 45 years, and one of them just flipped the board. Let's go back to the beginning, because to understand why this war is exploding right now, you have to understand why it started. And it started with a revolution that shocked the entire world. The year is 1979. Iran and Israel are not enemies. In fact, they are close. Israel has been selling weapons to Iran. Iran has been supplying Israel with oil. The Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, is considered a moderate pro-Western leader. The 2 countries have trade, intelligence sharing, even military cooperation under a program called Project Flower. It sounds almost impossible to believe now, but it's true. Iran and Israel were partners. Then, in February of 1979, everything changes. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returns from exile in Paris and takes control of Iran in a revolution that nobody in Washington or Tel Aviv saw coming. Within weeks, the new Islamic Republic makes its position on Israel crystal clear. Khomeini calls Israel a cancer that must be removed from the body of the Muslim world. The Israeli embassy in Tehran is handed over to Yasser Arafat's Palestinian Liberation Organization. Iran cuts all diplomatic ties. The partnership is dead. And a war that would be fought mostly in the dark, begins. Now here is where it gets complicated, because this isn't just a religious conflict. Yes, Iran is Shia Muslim, and the Islamic Republic has used the Palestinian cause and opposition to Israel as a central part of its political identity. But if you look at what Iran actually does over the next 4 decades, you see something much more strategic. Iran is trying to build what military analysts call a ring of fire around Israel, a network of armed groups, proxy militias, and state allies positioned on multiple borders simultaneously, so that if a war ever breaks out, Israel is fighting on every front at once. Think about what that looks like on a map. To Israel's north, in Lebanon, Iran funds and trains Hezbollah, which becomes arguably the most powerful non-state military force on the planet. At its peak, Hezbollah has over 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israel. Not hundreds, not thousands, 150,000. To Israel's southwest, in Gaza, Iran funds Hamas and Islamic Jihad, providing weapons, training, and money. To Israel's east, in Syria, Iran stations its own Revolutionary Guard forces and helps prop up Bashar al-Assad's government, giving Iran a land corridor from Tehran all the way to the Lebanese border. And in Yemen, Iran backs the Houthi movement, which gains control of large parts of the country and begins launching missiles into Saudi Arabia and eventually toward Israel. This is the famous axis of resistance, and it is the central strategic project of the Islamic Republic. Everything Iran does militarily in the Middle East flows from this vision. Surround Israel, bog it down, make it bleed, make any military strike against Iran so costly that Israel thinks twice, 3 times, 4 times before pulling the trigger. Israel's response to this strategy is what intelligence professionals call death by 1,000 cuts. If Iran is going to build a ring of fire, Israel is going to quietly destroy each link in that chain before it gets too strong. And over the decades, Israel becomes extraordinarily good at this, frighteningly good, in ways that are only confirmed years later. Let's talk about some of the most audacious operations in this hidden war, because this is where the story gets genuinely jaw-dropping. The year is 1992. Abbas Musawi, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, is killed in a helicopter strike by the Israeli Air Force in southern Lebanon. He's replaced by a young, relatively unknown cleric named Hassan Nasrallah. Israel thought it was cutting off the head of the snake. Instead, it handed the keys to someone who would spend the next 30 years building Hezbollah into a military machine that the entire world would eventually fear. Fast forward to 2008. Imad Mughniya, Hezbollah's military commander and the architect of some of the most deadly terrorist attacks against Americans and Israelis in history, is killed in a car bomb in Damascus, Syria. In Damascus, in the heart of the Syrian capital, in a country where Iran and Hezbollah operate openly, Israel reaches in and kills one of the most protected men in the Middle East. The message is clear. Nowhere is safe. No border protects you. No ally can shield you. But perhaps no operation in this entire shadow war is as bold as what happened in 2010, the Stuxnet worm. This is a piece of malware, a computer virus, so sophisticated, so precisely engineered that it represents a new chapter in the history of warfare. Stuxnet was designed to do one thing: destroy Iran's uranium enrichment centrifuges at the Natanz nuclear facility without leaving a fingerprint. The virus spreads through infected USB drives, works its way into the industrial control systems that run the centrifuges, and causes them to spin at the wrong speeds while reporting normal readings to the operators. The centrifuges tear themselves apart from the inside. Iran's scientists watch their equipment fail, and they don't know why. It takes months before they understand what has happened. By then, an estimated 1,000 centrifuges are destroyed. Iran's nuclear program is set back by years. The United States and Israel are widely believed to have jointly developed Stuxnet, though neither government has ever officially confirmed it. But what it showed the world was something revolutionary. You don't have to drop a bomb to destroy a nuclear program. You can do it with code. You can do it quietly, and you can do it in a way that leaves your enemy confused, humiliated, and uncertain about whether they can even trust their own machines. Iran learns the lesson. Tehran invests heavily in its own cyber capabilities, and over the next decade, Iranian hackers target Israeli infrastructure, water systems, hospitals, financial networks. The cyber war becomes a permanent and invisible front in this conflict. Now, let's talk about the nuclear question, because this is the beating heart of everything. The reason this conflict never cools down. The reason every Israeli prime minister for the past 20 years has called Iran's nuclear program an existential threat. Iran insists its nuclear program is peaceful, for civilian energy, for research. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the United Nations watchdog, has repeatedly found evidence that tells a different story. Secret facilities, hidden enrichment sites, military dimensions that Iran refuses to explain. And crucially, Iran has enriched uranium to 60% purity. Weapons-grade uranium requires 90%. Iran is not at 90%, but 60% has no civilian application, none.
There is no reason to enrich to 60% unless you are preparing for the possibility of going higher. The Israeli position has been consistent and unwavering for decades. A nuclear-armed Iran is something that Israel will not allow to happen. Full stop. This is not a political position, it is an existential calculation. Israel is a small country. One nuclear bomb on Tel Aviv is not a strategic setback, it is the end of the Jewish state. And when Iranian leaders have called for Israel to be wiped off the map, when Iran arms groups dedicated to Israel's destruction, when Iran's entire regional strategy is built around encircling and strangling Israel, Israeli leaders look at a nuclear Iran and they see one thing: an extinction-level threat. This is why Israel has been willing to do things that no other country in the world would attempt. The assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists are perhaps the clearest example. Between 2010 and 2020, at least 5 Iranian nuclear scientists are killed in targeted operations. Masoud Ali Mohammadi, Majid Shahriari, Dariush Rezayinejad, Mustafa Ahmedi Roshan, and most dramatically, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who is considered the father of Iran's nuclear weapons program, killed in November 2020 outside Tehran in a remote-controlled machine gun attack so precise and so technically sophisticated that intelligence analysts around the world sat up and took notice. A remote-controlled weapon hidden in a truck, triggered from a location possibly outside the country, targeting a man who was one of the most heavily guarded individuals in the Islamic Republic. Iran blames Israel. Israel says nothing. And somewhere in the silence, a message is delivered. We know who you are. We know where you live. We can reach you. Iran's response is rage, grief, and the kind of cold fury that doesn't explode immediately. It waits, it plans, it strikes through proxies, it positions assets, and it keeps enriching uranium. And now we need to talk about October 7th, 2023, because this is where the hidden war stops being hidden.
On the morning of October 7th, 2023, Hamas launches the largest and most horrific attack on Israeli soil since the founding of the state. Over 1,200 Israelis are killed. The victims are men, women, children, elderly people at a music festival, families in their homes. Over 240 people are taken hostage into Gaza. It is a massacre, and the entire world watches in real time. Israel's response is immediate and total. The Israeli Defense Forces begin a military campaign in Gaza that lasts for months. Tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians are killed. The humanitarian situation in Gaza becomes catastrophic. The world divides along familiar lines. Arab streets erupt in protest. Western governments wrestle with supporting Israel's right to self-defense while confronting the scale of civilian casualties. And Iran publicly celebrates October 7th. Iranian officials call it a great victory. But here is the question that intelligence agencies in Tel Aviv, Washington, and London are desperately trying to answer. How much did Iran know? How much did Iran plan? The consensus that eventually emerges is nuanced. Hamas planned and executed October 7th largely on its own, but Iran provided the ideological framework, the weapons, the funding, the training. Hamas uses Iranian-designed rockets. Hamas uses Iranian anti-tank missiles. The operational doctrine Hamas used to breach the border fence was trained and refined with Iranian and Hezbollah advisors. Iran may not have known the exact date, but Iran built the machine that made October 7th possible. Israel understands this, and as the war in Gaza continues, something shifts in Israeli strategic thinking. The doctrine of quiet deterrence, of fighting in the shadows, of avoiding direct confrontation with Iran begins to crack.
In April 2024, Israel launches a strike on the Iranian consulate building in Damascus, Syria. This is not a shadow operation. This is not a quiet assassination. This is an airstrike on a diplomatic facility on Syrian soil that kills multiple senior commanders of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, including General Mohammad Reza Zahedi, one of the most senior IRGC figures in the entire region. The strike sends shockwaves through Tehran. This is different. This is not Israel eliminating a scientist or disrupting a supply chain. This is Israel killing generals, publicly, on the territory of one of Iran's key allies. Iran announces it will respond, and for the first time in the history of this conflict, Iran does something it has never done before. On the night of April 13, 2024, Iran launches a direct, open, declared military attack on Israel from Iranian soil. Let that sink in. For 45 years, Iran has fought Israel through proxies, through shadows, through deniability. On April 13, 2024, Iran fires over 300 drones and missiles directly at Israel. Directly. It is the first time in history that Iran has done this. The world watches. American warships in the region help Israel shoot the projectiles down. Israeli air defenses, among the most sophisticated in the world, intercept the vast majority of the attack. Very little gets through. The physical damage is minimal, but the psychological damage is not minimal. The wall is broken. The rule that said Iran and Israel do not attack each other directly, that they fight only through proxies and shadows, that rule is gone. And once that rule is gone, it cannot be put back. Israel responds with a limited strike inside Iran. Then Iran expands support to Hezbollah. Then Hezbollah and Israel trade fire across the Lebanese border for months, escalating beyond anything seen in years. Then Israel assassinates Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, in September 2024 in a massive airstrike in Beirut. The man who had led Hezbollah for over 30 years, the man who had turned a militia into a military force, the man who was arguably Iran's most valuable strategic asset in the entire region, gone. Then Israel kills Hamas's political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, in Tehran itself. In Tehran, the capital of Iran. A man who was a guest of the Iranian government, killed while staying in Iran. If the Damascus consulate strike was a signal, the Haniyeh killing in Tehran was something else entirely. It was humiliation. It was Iran's security services, the IRGC, the intelligence apparatus, exposed as penetrated, compromised, unable to protect a guest in their own capital city. And in response, Iran fires another wave of missiles at Israel, bigger this time, more sophisticated, some of them hypersonic ballistic missiles that are harder to intercept. The attack still fails to cause massive damage, but the escalation ladder has another rung, and another, and another. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because what happens between Iran and Israel does not happen in isolation. Every move on this board affects the United States. America is Israel's closest and most important ally. The United States provides Israel with billions of dollars in military aid each year. American weapons, American intelligence, American diplomatic cover at the UN. Without American support, Israel's strategic position would be fundamentally different.
But America also has its own complicated relationship with Iran. After the 1979 revolution, Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. It is one of the most humiliating episodes in American diplomatic history. The wound never fully healed. America and Iran have been adversaries ever since. Under President Obama, America negotiated the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, in 2015. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. It was imperfect. Critics said it didn't go far enough, but it put a lid on the nuclear pot. In 2018, President Trump withdrew from the deal. He imposed what his administration called maximum pressure sanctions, designed to cripple the Iranian economy. Iran's economy did suffer, but Iran did not stop enriching uranium. In fact, without the deal's restrictions, Iran accelerated its program. The maximum pressure strategy achieved maximum pressure on the Iranian people. It did not achieve a new deal. In January 2020, President Trump ordered the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's Quds Force, the man who built the entire axis of resistance, who personally ran Iran's proxy network across the Middle East for 20 years. Soleimani was killed in a drone strike at Baghdad airport. He was arguably the second most powerful man in Iran after Supreme Leader Khamenei. His death sent shockwaves through the Iranian leadership that reverberate to this day. Iran retaliated by firing missiles at American bases in Iraq. Dozens of American soldiers suffered traumatic brain injuries, and then both sides stepped back. Neither wanted a full war, but the logic of escalation was now built into the relationship. Under President Obama, America attempted to revive the nuclear deal. The negotiations dragged on for years. They failed. And as the Biden administration managed the fallout from October 7th and the war in Gaza, the question of how to restrain Israel and deter Iran simultaneously became one of the most difficult diplomatic challenges in decades. Because here is the fundamental tension at the heart of American policy. America wants to prevent a full regional war, but America also cannot abandon Israel. And Israel's strategic interests, particularly on the nuclear question, are not always identical to America's preferred timeline for diplomacy. So, what does Iran actually want? This is the question that Western analysts debate endlessly. The Islamic Republic has three core strategic goals. First, regime survival. The mullahs in Tehran have watched what happened to Saddam Hussein in Iraq and Muammar Gaddafi in Libya when they gave up their weapons programs. They have concluded that military capability, including nuclear capability, is the only reliable guarantee of survival. Second, regional hegemony. Iran wants to be the dominant power in the Middle East, not just influential, dominant. The axis of resistance is the instrument of that ambition. Third, and perhaps most importantly for understanding the conflict with Israel, Iran uses hostility to Israel as a source of legitimacy. The Islamic Republic was born in revolution. Khomeini built the regime's identity in part around opposition to Israel and the United States. To make peace with Israel would be to betray the ideological foundation of the state. It would be, for the hardliners who run Iran, an act of self-destruction. And Israel? What does Israel actually want? Israel wants quiet, not peace necessarily, because Israeli leaders are realistic enough to know that peace with the Islamic Republic is not on the table, but quiet. The ability to grow its economy, develop its technology, live without existential threat. And above all, Israel wants to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, not slow it down, not delay it, prevent it permanently. This is the red line that Israeli leaders across the political spectrum agree on. Everything else is negotiable. This is not. The tragedy of this conflict is that both sides have reasons to keep fighting, and neither side has a clear path to winning. Iran cannot destroy Israel.
Israel cannot destroy the Islamic Republic without triggering a catastrophic regional war that would likely pull in the United States. The axis of resistance is damaged but not destroyed. Hezbollah has lost its leader and taken devastating blows, but the organization still exists. Hamas still exists. The Houthis are still firing missiles. Iran's nuclear program continues. And yet, something fundamental has changed. The rules of the shadow war are gone. Both sides are now operating in the open in ways that would have been unimaginable 5 years ago. Each escalation creates pressure for the next escalation. Each humiliation demands a response. Each response demands a counter-response. There's a concept in strategic theory called escalation dominance, the idea that if you can always escalate more than your opponent, you control the conflict. Iran has believed for decades that its axis of resistance gives it escalation dominance over Israel, because any Israeli strike on Iran can be answered with Hezbollah missiles, Hamas attacks, Houthi drones. But Israel has spent years systematically dismantling those escalatory tools. Hezbollah is weakened, Hamas is decimated, the ring of fire is full of holes. What happens when Iran looks around and realizes its strategic depth is gone? That the proxies it spent 40 years building are broken or broken? That Israel has demonstrated it can strike inside Iran itself? That the shadow war deterrent is no longer working?
This is the most dangerous moment. Not when a country is strong, when a country feels cornered. Some analysts believe Iran will accelerate its push toward a nuclear weapon, calculating that a bomb is the only thing that can restore deterrence. Others believe internal pressures inside Iran, economic collapse, popular discontent, a young population that is exhausted by isolation and sanctions, will eventually force the regime toward negotiation or collapse. Others believe Israel is preparing for a strike on Iranian nuclear facilities that would make the 1981 strike on Iraq's Osirak reactor look small. And in Washington, the debate continues. How much support do you give Israel? How do you prevent escalation that pulls American troops into a direct conflict? What is the cost of Iran getting the bomb? What is the cost of a war to prevent it? These are not hypothetical questions. These are questions that will shape the next decade of American foreign policy. These are questions that will determine whether the Middle East stabilizes or erupts. These are questions that affect oil prices, global trade, American credibility, and the lives of tens of millions of people. The shadow war between Iran and Israel lasted 45 years. It produced assassinations, cyber attacks, proxy conflicts, nuclear sabotage, and a generation of young people on both sides who have grown up with this conflict as the background noise of their lives. Now, the shadows are gone. What comes next is being decided right now, in intelligence briefings, in war cabinets, in underground bunkers, in back channels that the public will never see. But the decision that gets made in the next few years, the decision about whether this conflict finds some new equilibrium or whether it breaks into something the world has not seen before, that decision will echo for a very long time. Pay attention, because this story is not over. It is barely beginning.